You just finished feeding your newborn, they're finally asleep, and you're like, I can finally relax. And then 30 seconds later, they're crying, they're rooting, and you're like, they can't be hungry just yet. Does this sound familiar? I'm Erin. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner and lactation counselor. Make sure to hit subscribe. If your baby is going through this, they might be cluster feeding. Cluster feeding is a period of time, usually in the evenings, where your baby seems to be wanting to eat nonstop. So that means they might have just finished a feed and then they're showing hunger cues right away. It is very normal, but very challenging. Cluster feeding can happen to both breastfed and formula-fed babies, but this video is specifically for babies who are receiving breast milk. Cluster feeding often happens because your baby is going through a growth spurt or they're going through some developmental changes and their intake needs change. So we know that breastfeeding is a feedback loop. So the more that's removed from the breast, the more your body produces. So if babies are needing extra calories to get through these growth spurts or whatever is going on developmentally, they will often cluster feed and tell the body, hey, there's not enough milk, so we need to make more. Even though it's really hard in the time that you're doing it, it's actually a very positive thing for your milk supply to meet the demands of your growing baby. When are the most common times for babies to cluster feed? So you might notice your baby feeding very frequently in the first few days before your milk supply transitions from colostrum to more mature milk. And that is very normal. It's very normal for your baby to eat upwards 10 to 12, and sometimes I even hear 13 or 14 times a day. At that point, we're establishing your supply, helping your milk transition, and so we want you to feed your baby on demand. Somewhere between the second and third week, you might notice these cluster feeding patterns starting to happen. Another common time that I see it is around the 6-week period and then the 3-month period. That's not always how it is, and every baby is different, but these are just some patterns that I've seen in practice and with moms that I've worked with. The most common time of day that the cluster feeding periods happen are usually in the late afternoon to evening. So maybe 3 to 4 to 5 p.m. going to 10 or 11. But sometimes I hear families that it actually starts happening more like the 10 p.m. into the wee hours of the morning, which makes things really, really challenging. How long does cluster feeding last? So when we're talking about a cluster feeding session, usually it's a couple hours where you're doing back to back feeds and your baby is still showing you hunger cues. So they might feed in a, let's say, 5-hour period or 4-hour period. They might be feeding every 30 to 45 minutes or so. The good news is it usually lasts for just a few days. It might be 2, 3, 4 days up to a week, depending on if their needs are being met, how fast the body is responding. If you're in this right now, know that it is really challenging and it takes up a lot of your very, very little energy that you have when you have a new baby. So if you need any help, make sure to schedule a one-on-one consult, either with me virtually or find yourself an in-person lactation or talk to your pediatric provider. How do you tell if cluster feeding is normal and when should you be concerned? If your baby's cluster feeding is following this typical pattern, it's usually happening in the evenings. They're feeding maybe 5 to 10 minutes on each side. They might be asleep and then fussy, show hunger cues, but they're consoling in between. That is all pretty normal. What I want to make sure is that your baby is, one, gaining enough weight. So if you need to see your pediatric provider or a lactation professional to do a weight check, that's always a good thing if you're concerned about your supply, and that your baby is having good wet and poopy diapers based on their age. So when I'm talking about a wet diaper, I want it to be, fairly saturated. So I want it to have a little bit of weight in it. So it's not just like a little bit, like if you have lines, it's not just a little bit, but they're good saturated diapers. So at least 6 if your baby is day 5 or 6 of life or older. Now, if your baby is kind of cluster feeding all day long, or they're fussy all day long, they're not having good wet or poopy diapers, they're falling asleep immediately on the breast after they get on and it doesn't seem like they're transferring well, they're not having these periods of wakefulness, those are all reasons why I would want you to contact your pediatric provider to maybe see how your baby's gaining weight, to see a lactation professional to see if your baby is actually transferring milk or if there's a concern with your milk supply. Other things that I would want you to reach out to your pediatric provider about would be any kind of back arching or discomfort with feeds, signs of reflux. If your baby is spitting up and it seems like a large amount, but they're also very, very uncomfortable with feeds, that requires a little bit more attention. Finally, if your baby is continuing to cluster feed and it has been longer than a week, or you're like, my baby just has never stopped cluster feeding, if this is something you're concerned about, definitely be evaluated. Okay, but let's be real. Knowing why cluster feeding happens doesn't make it easier when you're actually in the moment. So here are things that I recommend to do to make cluster feeding easier and to make your life a little bit better when it's really challenging. I think the best thing that you can do is prepare. So if you can start recognizing the trends and knowing it's going to happen, make your space as comfortable as possible. I find that like my butt gets a little bit uncomfortable when I sit too long, so that it is different pillows or whatever you need, comfy blanket, all of your snacks, water with a straw, snacks that you can hold with one hand, and just knowing that like this might not be the time that you're going to be able to like eat soup or eat a salad. You might do something that's like a sandwich that's a little bit faster, can be held with one hand, that you can eat when you're going to be hungry, because when your baby is demanding this from your body, you're probably going to be very hungry and you're probably going to be thirsty too. So bring more water than you think you need. Choose a very comfortable spot in your house where you have entertainment. So whether you're listening to an audiobook, you're binge watching your favorite show, or really whatever show. And sometimes trash TV is great when you have a newborn and you're like, I just need something that's mindless because I am exhausted. Or you have a Kindle, just whatever you're going to need to do to entertain yourself, knowing that you're probably going to be tied to the couch for a little bit of time or wherever you're feeding your baby. Just know that this is the time to ask for help, and it's okay to accept help. So if there's a meal train, or if somebody is like, just let me know, think of ways that people can help you. If you have a partner, let them do the dishes, let them do the laundry, let them wash all the baby bottles, whatever it is, just whatever you can do to make your life easier at the time. Or, give yourself some grace. If there's 50 things that you wanted to accomplish during the day and you're like, oh no, I don't think I can accomplish any of these things, that's okay. If there's 2 things you wanted to accomplish during the day and you didn't get to accomplish that, that's okay. You are keeping a tiny human alive and your body is, going into overdrive producing milk, and that's okay. Just take the time to rest and snuggle with your baby and do whatever you can to get through these difficult and challenging times. Here's the takeaway. Cluster feeding is the way that your baby is telling your body to make more milk. It is very normal as long as your baby is having good wet and poopy diapers, and if it only lasts for a few days to a week. If you ever have any concerns, it is never the wrong idea to talk to your pediatric provider or see a lactation consultant. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or you can schedule a one-on-one appointment. Make sure to hit subscribe. Bye-bye.